One of the concepts that is newer to people using Vue is the idea of custom events. Now, events have been around in the web for quite a long time, basically since the beginning. We're talking things like click, key up, double click, etc. And so in this video, we're going to talk about why custom events exist in Vue and how we use them. Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Ben Hong, I'm a Vue.js core team member and senior DX engineer at Netlify. And today we're here to talk about custom events in Vue, why we use them, and how they work. So let's jump right in. All right, so jumping into VS Code, we can see that I have the Giga-Vue project that we've been working on in the Building with Ben series, and we're going to be using this project to explain how custom events work and basically what's going on. So if we go ahead and open up our Giga-Vue application right now, we see that what we have is we have the, let me bump up the font a little bit so it's easier to see. We have the DynoPet as a child of this basically GigaPet device, or Giga-Vue device. I keep saying GigaPets. Well, that's because that's the original one. And so one of the things when it comes to events that we emit, this is quite common. So if we look at, for example, app.vue, most of us, regardless of what framework you've come from, are familiar with things such as, let's see, not app footer, I want the homepage. Yep, so you can see here, inside of our app.vue, we have a bunch of like @click. And so this is probably the most common example when it comes to events in the web. Because when the browser is listening for something, it needs something to tell it that something's happening and then handle that event accordingly. And so we basically have an API to handle various things that happen throughout the web, whether it's clicking onto something, typing into something, hovering over something. I mean, the list is quite long. So if you're looking for like all the different events, we just go to JavaScript events, like MDN for documentation. So introduction to events, you can see here that this basically gives you a whole explanation regarding why events are important on the web, but ultimately they basically allow us to trigger functionality based on a certain user interaction, or as the name is called, a certain event. And so the reason why we're here today is to talk about custom events. And so why custom events? Well, the truth is that while it's good to have these built-in native events that we deal with on the day-to-day, the truth is we often need to actually deal with custom things that happen in our applications. After all, we all have different requirements and things we want to do when it comes to our app. So in the instance of Giga-Vue, for example, we have a DynoPet right here that we want to actually be able to tell the device whether or not like the state that it's in. So whether it's hungry, whether it's angry, happy. I think we have sleeping as the three that we currently show at the moment. And so let's go ahead and take a look at how that might work. So inside of our DynoPet here, we can see that we have DynoPet imported all the way here on the bottom. And then the mood basically determines what's being basically how it's basically rendering. So if we jump into DynoPet itself, we can see here that there are different states that it is in, right? Whether it's angry, happy, or sleeping, and that's what ultimately renders. And so the question is though, is that who should really be determining whether or not the DynoPet is basically in what mood? And so you might think that, oh, this might be like the device itself. The device itself should be responsible for telling it. But that doesn't totally make sense as far as like this model that we have after all, right? If we're modeling it after like a digital pet, the pet itself has a state as far as what's happening, and the device, as far as Giga-Vue is concerned, is to communicate that back to the user. And so given that, what we want to do is actually have DynoPet be like basically own the state of this data. So you can imagine that what we would actually want to do is we would have a data in here. So here we have like a data property. And here we would probably just actually have something called like mood, for example. And so here then we would say, let's see, we have happy. So let's just say happy. And then let's initialize our pet. And then we can switch out the dyno mood just for, I guess for now we'll call it this. Oh, this dot mood is two different areas. So I'll just say inner mood. So this is the inner mood. This is the so here we go. I'm just going to switch this to inner mood. So now we know this is actually being managed at the state level. So the way we know that is that now when we switch it or attempt to switch it, nothing's changing. And that makes sense because we're using the data store as the way to communicate this. What we want to be able to do now is actually be able to have the state displayed on the device. Because again, DynoPet's goal is really to encapsulate, call it the UI. It's the ability to change the way it looks and those sort of things. But when it comes to the display here in Giga-Vue, that is where we want to be able to actually then sort of communicate those things. So if we sort of look at this, one way we could do this is let's go ahead and create a mood. So here I'm just going to say pet mood. So that should just randomly appear somewhere on the screen. Here we go. Yep. And so I'm going to just give this a class of style.mood. And we're going to go ahead and let's just style this so that it displays accordingly. So I'm going to position absolute on this one, left 50%. Let's see where that lands us real quick. Great. That's pretty much there, but I think I'll have it sit in the green part. So top, we'll say 50%, maybe a little bit more, 70, okay, 60. And then I showed this trick before, but if we wanted to center in directly in the center, we use the transform attribute as a way of basically translating, like moving the position by its own width by 50%. And so that's what gives you that sort of perfect middle ground. And so for some reason it's disappeared. Oh, it's right here now. Translate X, sure, that was too far. So let's do 65. A little bit better, and we'll do just 70. 70 is too much, so 68. I will bump it down just a smidge more. Yeah, happy with that. And so what we can do now is I can do like font weight, bold color, let's do white. And that's better. And font size, let's bump it up a bit, which means it probably needs to be bumped up. Yeah, I figured as much. Okay, that's bigger and easier to see. I'm happy with that, but we obviously now need to take this down a notch just to a smidge. Okay, now we have the pet mood. Okay, so if the DynoPet is responsible for updating said mood, then we want it to be able to actually communicate that back up to the parent. Now, there are a couple paradigms for this. So those who come from a React background, or even just having done a lot of JavaScript, we're very used to the callback method, which is basically what we would do theoretically is so inside of our DynoPet, right? We would have, instead of a prop, we would have a data store that's tracking our reactive object. And in here, I'm just going to do, I'll just call it parent pet mood, like this. In here would be what is tracking the actual state. So theoretically, right, you would say happy. And so if I go down here and then let's update pet mood to parent pet mood to show that it changes. Save. Okay, so we have happy. That is the state of our pet. And so traditionally, when we're thinking of how we would communicate changing the pet's mood, what some basically might try to do instead is actually pass a function down from the parent. So you can imagine that here, and just to illustrate it, we have a method called change pet mood. It'll take the actual like mood string as like the parameter, and then it would go this dot parent pet mood equals mood. So theoretically, right, if we went ahead and let me just add a quick button here that said click change pet mood, and I'm just gonna say sad here, and then we say change to sad, for example. You see that when I click, it goes ahead and updates correctly. And that's to be expected, right? This is fairly vanilla Vue as far as we're concerned. But people will often take that one step further because they're going, oh, well, it's changing the mood, so I'll just pass it to the children as a way of telling it what to do. So you can imagine what we would do instead is, let's go ahead and full screen this real quick. With DynoPet here, let's bring that over to the right. And then we have here our DynoPet here, great. Actually, yep, okay. So what we would do here is inside of our props, we would theoretically have like change pet mood prop that is a type of function. and it would be required because we need it to basically like update what's going on. So what you would do here inside of, sorry, this got updated. Let me switch this over here. Inside of here is you would literally pass a function from the parent into the dyno pet. So here you can see change pet mood is equal to change pet mood. So we've defined, so to be clear, we've defined the method on Giga-Vue, and on dyno pet, we've simply inherited a function that then we will call. So for example, now if, again, the inner mood is, let's call this one hungry. And on our template, we're gonna have a button, whoops, and let's make sure this shows up correctly, is test. So let me bump this over real quick. And so we initialize our pet, we see that the test button is here. Okay, so what we're seeing here, I realize we don't have a sleep, that's fine. So knowing this, we actually, I just wanna make sure something shows up. So let's do, I think sleep, I have sleep. Sleep, one of the ones I've imported. It is one of the ones I imported. Okay, dyno, sleep, inner mood. That should have worked. Component is dyno.this.inner mood. Yep, it should be dyno sleep. Import dyno sleep. Oh, is it being moved because of how things are positioned? Let's find out real quick. Yep. SVG. Oh, the button's throwing it off. The button's super throwing it off. Okay, that's fine. So again, if we click on test, you'll see that nothing's happening, which makes sense. But what we want to do is call this function that's been passed down, change pet mood, and then we'll pass it a thing. So here you would say @click change pet mood, and we're gonna pass it the inner mood, like that. And so now if we go ahead and again, let's call it dragon and test, you'll see that it now actually passes it and it updates it. And so here we have a traditional paradigm here of like, oh, well, I pass a callback function, the child calls it, and we're done. And so does this work? Absolutely, it works. But I would contend it's not the best approach. And the reason for this is you've basically now created a very tightly coupled function that comes down, and basically we've tied the child to how the parent works. And so you can argue that because it's a parent-child relationship, this is totally fine because you're expecting this explicit call it like dependency on one another. But from an architectural perspective, especially as children become more generic and you have things like base component and these sort of things, you start running into now a problem where your props need to be actually fairly generic. So now instead of it being like change pet mood, which in this case is actually very explicit, so arguably not very many people are going to be confused by this. But can you imagine if we actually needed to have a specific handler for click, specific handler for key up? You're basically just going to be passing specific events down as callback functions into your children as a way of passing, like sort of updating the data in the parent. And so in this regard, you're kind of like, it's in one way, it's a little bit skipping, or like not skipping, but changing that paradigm of one-way data flow in the sense that you've now like sort of done like a backdoor like escape hatch into the child to like the child updates the parent. When really the parent should update the parent and the parent can pass data down, but the child updating the parent directly through callback functions is just a little bit weird from like the again, we're talking about one-way data flow. And so what's the alternative instead? Well, Vue has implemented custom events as a way of basically saying the child can tell the parent that something has happened and the parent can react to that. And in this regard, this is actually much cleaner from a data flow perspective, in my personal opinion. Because now let's change this up now. Now we're gonna abandon the props, and we're not gonna do it like that. Instead, what we're gonna do, let me go ahead and close this one actually up for now. Can I save this? Yep, that's fine. And then let's go ahead and delete this button so that things don't blow up again. So there you go, sleep, there you go. So it was the button that was like completely shifting everything. Okay, so what we wanna do is from inside of the dyno, we wanna actually be able to update the mood. And so the way we do this is, let's go ahead and make this full screen, is that here, when we want to update, so again, let's go ahead and this time, okay, I'm gonna have a button. Let's see, can I do it like this? Let me make sure something doesn't break. So here, div, here. Let me cut out the button first to make sure this is, okay, so this is fine, this still works. The reason I say this is that we're just gonna have a class of wrapper here. And so inside of my styles, I'll use modules. And so the wrapper here is position relative. And the reason I want this is because this button is gonna be different. So I'm gonna say update pet mood, and then to, again, let's say update mood. And then we're gonna make this now the class button. And then actually I just realized we're using CSS module, so we need the style object. So button here, position absolute, and then let's just do left 0 real quick. And so now, there we go, let's refresh, drag in, oh yeah, update mood, perfect. And so let's just, that bothers me a little bit, so let's just top 50%. It's removing everything. Okay, it'll have to do for now because it looks like it's having trouble repositioning like mid SVG because it's basically resetting itself. Okay, so now that we have our button, what we want to do is we want to tell the parent that something is happening, right? The mood has changed. And so the way we do this is we go ahead and I've signed the method that we haven't written yet called update pet mood. And so inside of a method here, we're going to say update pet mood. And what we're going to do here is we're going to call the emit function. So this is a global method that Vue provides. So it's accessed via the this.$ emit inside of the options API, because this is something that Vue is specific to Vue. This is Vue functionality. That's why we prefix it with the $. Otherwise, when it's just like this inside of the options API, this theoretically could just be like basically a generic emit function that you yourself have defined. So in order to prevent name clashing in that regard, this is why Vue prefixes its global methods with the $. And so our custom event then takes 2 arguments. One of them is optional. The first one is like, what is the event going to be called? And so if we think of this as a browser event, right? It's like when you click on something, like the browser is very generic. So it wants things like the actual input. Key up, key down, mouse enter, mouse leave, click, double click, those sort of things. In this case, when it comes to custom events, it's important to then be semantic about what is actually happening. So as far as I'm concerned, the event for us is update pet mood. It's really that simple. And so when naming your events, you want to make sure that you're doing it in the kebab case. That way it's consistent with the standards, and you also ensure the parsing happens correct. Because if you try another casing, weird shenanigans can happen. So again, stick with kebab casing when it comes to custom events. Once you've passed the event, that simply could be enough. So theoretically, right, at its simplest form, we have now allowed ourselves to emit an event. And so now what we need is we need the actual parent to listen to said event. And so the way you do that is on the component where the event is being emitted. That's the way to think of this. This is where we can listen for it. And the way we listen for it is just like you would listen to any other event, right? Like at click, at key up. Well, guess what? It's going to be at update pet mood. So that will correspond with this update pet mood. And then here is where we can then say change pet mood. And we can assign the callback function that will respond to that event. And this, in my mind, is much cleaner because now we've really created this explicit relationship as far as like the pet is just sort of doing a generic thing of saying, hey, please update this thing. Please handle this data for me accordingly, or at least this event. And then the parent will know what to do with it. And so here now, when it comes to change pet mood, let's just go ahead and update. So I'm not passing anything right now. So let's go ahead and update it to angry. And so let me go ahead and actually, to make sure we show that something works, we're going to go ahead and still use the regular prop mood as a way of showing something works. Okay. So now if I refresh, right, and then we go ahead and do diamond or diamond, and then we click angry, you'll see now that it actually has switched right? The event has been emitted, and it's actually calling that callback function. Now, I'm a little confused as to why the SVG didn't change, because mood is pet mood. And then this dot, oh wait, I said parent pet mood, right. Because pet mood is also being passed down as a prop here. So yeah, so hang on a sec. So if I go down here, just to prove to you that it worked, we don't want just the pet mood, which is being passed at the app level. This is the parent pet mood. Okay, there we go. You see, roar! Our dinosaur is angry. And so here now we have what it really is sort of call it the Vue way of handling communicating data up from the child to the parent in a way that still has a similar concept to actually what we're already familiar with as far as native JavaScript APIs, in terms of I'm doing this thing and like you handle it. And so moving forward, the question of course is like, this is nice, but we want to actually, the pet is supposed to tell you the mood, right? And so in that case, what you do is, this is where the second optional argument comes into play. And so inside of our Dino pet, you'll see that here we can take a second argument, which is basically the payload. And that's what is often referred to, which is basically saying, what is the cargo and what is the thing, the data that the event will carry up to the parent. So this is typically done in an object because it allows you basically pass multiple properties as a way, like, to the payload. Because otherwise, like, if you can't chain payloads together, so you can't be like, I'll pass this mood and this number and this. If you want to do that, just pass a single object containing the things. And so typically what you'll see is if you think that basically your data structure has any chance of changing, unless you're really sure it's like a primitive value, like a string, a number, and it'll never change. I like just keeping it an object because it gives that flexibility for enhancement going forward, and it doesn't require a lot of syntax changes. Because once you change from one to the other, you can imagine on a large app, you're going to break a lot of code, because if it used to be a number and now it needs to be an object, everything changes. So here now, the pet mood, I'm just going to say mood. In this case, we're going to pass it this dot inner mood. That's what it's going to be. So in this case, it's going to be sleep. And so when we click update pet mood, it should go ahead and send it up to the parent. And then let me update the functionality here when it comes to our change pet mood. It will get said mood as a payload. But we're going to go ahead. So actually, I'm just going to call it payload just to be very explicit. But it can be destructured. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. But it'll be payload.mood. Okay. So now here we can see everything's fine. But when we click update mood, boom, both are updated to sleep. And then we can see now that the parent has changed accordingly and the child also updated correctly. And so this is really cool because now, and so, as far as the destructuring, this can be structured to look like this instead. So this is what this is what you typically see when you have basically event handlers. They will basically destructure the payload. And this is why I was saying in the future, it's easy to modify this. If like we also need to like get the ID and like the age or whatever, you can simply just tack those on to your parameters rather than if it used to be just mood by itself. And then in the future, you want to update it. Now you have to go through the process of every single function changing it. So this is why typically everything is put in an object. So I'll just leave it destructured in this particular case. But that is how custom events work in Vue. And so when it comes to custom events, it's really up to you and your team as far as what makes the most sense. I know that there are plenty of teams who are used to the paradigm of passing callback functions after all. But while custom events might seem foreign at first, again, this is actually how the web has worked to begin with. It's always been about when an event happens, do this thing. And so why not follow that model when it comes to this direction, like this data flow direction of child passing an event up, and the parent can then actually do the thing it does, rather than having the parent tell the child very prescriptively how to handle things, which again makes it a lot harder when it comes to reuse across the basically larger application. So give this a shot. And for those wondering how I built Giga-Vue, be sure to check out the Building with Ben series, which I'll queue up in the next screen.